In 1938, Mercedes de Acosta traveled to the sacred mountain Arunachala in Tiruvannamalai in South India to meet the venerated Indian holy man Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. In an attempt to cross paths with a person she met at the ashram during her visit, she became aware of a young American boy who sat before the Maharshi some years after her visit, who reportedly had recent connections with the person she was looking for. De Acosta made an attempt to meet with that same boy, then a grown-up man, and one of, if not the last remaining Americans to have sat before the Maharshi. Before that meeting could be finalized, De Acosta passed away. She may have been willing to add more or share to what is known about her meeting with Sri Ramana, but it is now lost. However, what is known about De Acosta's stay at the ashram sitting before the Maharshi for 3 days is this. She wrote about it in her autobiography, that those were the most significant days of her life. She writes from Tiruvannamalai at Arunachala in 1938. A Search in Secret India, the book by Paul Brunton, had a profound influence on me. In it, I learned for the first time about Ramana Maharshi, a great Indian saint and sage. It was as though some emanation of this saint was projected out of the book to me. For days and nights after reading about him, I could not think of anything else. I became, as it were, possessed by him. I could not even talk of anything else. Nothing could distract me from the idea that I must go and meet this saint. From this time on, although I ceased to speak too much about it, the whole direction of my life turned towards India and away from Hollywood. I felt that I would surely go there, although there was nothing at this time to indicate that I would. Nevertheless, I felt I would meet the Maharshi and that this meeting would be the greatest experience of my life. I had very little money, far too little to risk going to India, but something pushed me towards it. I went to the steamship company and booked myself one of the cheapest cabins on the Indian ship, the SS Victoria, sailing from Genoa to Bombay toward the beginning of October. In the meantime, I flew to Dublin to see my sister. I had booked passage to Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, intending from there to cross over to southern India and go directly to Tiruvannamalai, where Ramana Maharshi lived. But when the ship called at Bombay, Norina Machabeli came on board to see me with a message from Meher Baba, saying that Consuela, a lady traveling companion who was a follower of Baba, and I must get off the ship and come to see him at Ahmednagar, about 2 hours from Bombay. I did not want to do this, as my real purpose in India was to see the Maharshi, and I was impatient to get to him. She had met Meher Baba in California and had considerable respect for him. However, her faith in him waned prior to coming to India, and it had all but evaporated. In Madras, I hired a car, and so anxious was I to arrive in Tiruvannamalai that I did not go to bed and traveled by night, arriving about 7 o'clock in the morning after driving almost 11 hours. I was very tired as I got out of the car in a small square in front of the temple, the Arunachaleshwara temple. The driver explained he would take me no farther. I turned toward the hill of Arunachala and hurried in the hot sun along the dust-covered road to the abode about 2 miles from town where the sage dwelt. As I ran those 2 miles deeply within myself, I knew that I was running toward the great experience of my life. When dazed and filled with emotion, I first entered the hall. I did not quite know what to do. Coming from strong sunlight into the somewhat darkened hall, it was at first difficult to see. Nevertheless, I perceived Bhagavan at once, sitting in the Buddha posture on his couch in the corner. At the same moment, I felt overcome by some strong power in the hall, as if an invisible wind was pushing violently against me. For a moment I felt dizzy. Then I recovered myself. To my great surprise, I suddenly heard an American voice calling out to me, "Hello, come in." It was the voice of an American named Guy Haig, who originally came from Long Beach, California. He told me later that he had been honorably discharged from the American Navy in the Philippines and had then worked his way to India, taking up the study of yoga when he reached Bombay. Then he heard about Sri Ramana Maharshi, and feeling greatly drawn to him, decided to go to Tiruvannamalai. When I met him, he had already been with the Maharshi for a year, sitting uninterruptedly day and night in the hall with the sage. He rose from where he was sitting against the wall and came toward me, taking my hand and leading me back to a place beside him against the wall. He did not at first speak to me, allowing me to pull myself together. I was able to look around the hall, but my gaze was drawn to Bhagavan, who was sitting absolutely straight in the Buddha posture, looking directly in front of him. His eyes did not blink or in any way move. Because they seemed so full of light, I had the impression they were gray. I learned later that they were brown, although there have been various opinions as to the color of his eyes. His body was naked except for a loincloth. I discovered soon after that this and his staff were absolutely his only possessions. His body seemed firm as if tanned by the sun, although I found that the only exercise he ever took was a 20-minute walk every afternoon at 5 o'clock when he walked on the hill and sometimes greeted yogis who came to prostrate themselves at his feet. He was a strict vegetarian, but he only ate what was placed before him, and he never expressed a desire for any kind of food. As he sat there, he seemed like a statue, and yet something extraordinary emanated from him. I had a feeling that on some invisible level I was receiving spiritual shocks from him, although his gaze was not directed towards me. He did not seem to be looking at anything, and yet I felt he could see and was conscious of the whole world. Suddenly, Guy Haig whispered, "Bhagavan is in Samadhi." I looked around. Squatting on the floor or sitting in the Buddha posture or lying prostrate face down, a number of Indians prayed, some of them reciting their mantras out loud. Several small monkeys came into the hall and approached Bhagavan. They climbed onto his couch and broke the stillness with their gay chatter. He loved animals, and any kind was respected and welcomed by him in the ashram. They were treated as equals to the humans and always addressed by their names. Sick animals were brought to Bhagavan and kept by him on his couch or on the floor beside him until they were well. Many animals had died in his arms. When I was there, he had a much-loved cow who wandered in and out of the hall by the name of Lakshmi, and often lay down beside him and licked his hand. He loved to tell stories about the goodness of animals. It was remarkable that none of the animals ever fought or attacked each other in his company. After I had been sitting several hours in the hall listening to the mantras of the Indians and the incessant droning of flies, and lost in a sort of inner world, Guy Haig suggested that I go and sit near the Maharshi. He said, "You can never tell when Bhagavan will come out of Samadhi. When he does, I am sure he will be pleased to see you, and it will be beneficial for you at this moment to be sitting near him." I moved near Bhagavan, sitting at his feet and facing him, and Guy was right. Not long after this, Bhagavan opened his eyes. He moved his head and looked directly down at me, his eyes looking into mine. It would be impossible to describe this moment, and I am not going to attempt it. I can only say that at this second I felt my inner being raised to a new level, as if suddenly my state of consciousness was lifted to a much higher degree. Perhaps in this split second I was no longer my human self, but the self. Then Bhagavan smiled at me. It seemed to me that I had never before known what a smile was. I said, "I have come a long way to see you." There was silence. I had stupidly brought a piece of paper on which I had written a number of questions I wanted to ask him. I fumbled for it in my pocket, but the questions were already answered by merely being in his presence. There was no need for questions or answers. Nevertheless, my dull intellect expressed one. "Tell me, whom shall I follow? What shall I follow? I have been trying to find this out for years by seeking in religions, in philosophies, in teachings." Again there was silence. And after a few minutes, which seemed to me a long time, he spoke. "You are not telling the truth. You are just using words, just talking. You know perfectly well whom to follow. Why do you need me to confirm it?" "You mean I should follow my inner self?" "I don't know anything about your inner self. You should follow the self. There is nothing or no one else to follow." I asked again, "What about religions, teachers, and gurus?" "If they can help in the quest of the self, but can they help? Can religion, which teaches you to look outside yourself, which promises a heaven and a reward outside yourself, can this help you? It is only by diving deep into the spiritual heart that one can find the self." He placed his right hand on his right breast and continued, "Here lies the heart, the dynamic spiritual heart. It is called Hridaya and is located on the right side of the chest and is clearly visible to the inner eye of an adept on the spiritual path. Through meditation, you can learn to find the self in the cave of this heart.